What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with the Monday Megamix. This video will be 1 hour and 30 minutes of new true scary stories. Now that I've informed you guys about the change in schedule, I'm going to stop including that at the beginning of these videos and just start getting right into them. If you guys end up enjoying this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing all of those helps the video to do well, and ensures I can keep making these videos daily, and especially the long ones, for a long time to come. If you guys like the content enough to support the channel, please be sure to consider joining the channel membership. It's only $2, and you get special emoticons for commenting and special logos next to your name when you do comment. Of course, it's not necessary at all, and the content will never be hidden behind a paywall, but it's something you can do if you'd like to support the channel. Without further ado, I will get into the true scary stories, and I will let you guys enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again at the end. I bought a house in the suburbs a few years ago, and since I lived pretty close to the train station, I decided I would use the train to commute to work. This was about 5 years ago, I'd guess, right around the time I had my son. These days I drive and have to put up with additional traffic, but there's a good reason as to why. I'll tell you the whole terrifying story. On the night this happened, I had been out with some coworkers after work. This kind of thing was standard in our company. We would usually get together and have a drink about once a month or so. It was late at night, and I knew it was going to be a real late one. It always was. I wanted to make it home before the last train. My wife was already there with my son, and I didn't want her to have to be up too late worrying about me. I caught the second or third from last train of the night back home. When I jumped on the train, I noticed it was almost completely empty. That was pretty great to me, because I had enough space to spread out and relax a bit. As it turned out, though, I seemed to have gotten a little bit too relaxed and fell asleep. I was running pretty low on it, and it was about a 50-minute train ride home. Thought I might as well catch up on a little lost shut-eye. I didn't need to change trains either, so it didn't seem like a big deal. I would wake up every now and then to see people coming on or exiting the train, and go right back to sleep. In the daytime, you could see these huge high-rise apartment blocks from the train's windows. I guess these people were on their way home from work to their apartments. At one point, I knew from the station I was at that I would be home in another 20 or so minutes. I decided against shutting my eyes again in order to not fall asleep and miss my station. I stood up and faced the window. I figured that looking at something was better than just sitting there in my seat and staring at the train walls. I wanted some distraction. I watched the shapes of the buildings passing by under the cover of darkness. I tried to imagine where I was based on the shapes of those buildings. At the next stop, the last few people on board got off, leaving me completely alone now. It was sort of unusual to be all alone on a train at night. If you've ever been on the trains in Tokyo, you'll understand. Usually they'll have at least a little bit of a crowd. I was kind of enjoying the rarity of my situation. The buzz I had from the beers earlier was starting to wear off, and the tiredness was really kicking into gear. I was about one station away from home at this point. Between the station I was at previously and the station I get off at, there's this big tunnel that runs right through a mountain and plunges the train into complete darkness for about 3 minutes or so. When the train went into the tunnel this time, I used the opportunity to look at myself in the window. The darkness acted like a bit of a mirror. I used the window to adjust my hair and make myself more presentable for when I got home and faced my wife. As I looked, though, I heard myself mutter. Reflected in the window was a man standing right behind me, an old man who looked to be in his 50s. He looked like a hiker or something. I had been completely alone in the carriage just moments ago. Needless to say, I was startled, but due to how tired or buzzed I was, I wondered if I'd just completely missed this guy. I decided that I must have, and told myself not to worry too much about it. I made a mental note to check my surroundings more thoroughly next time. I tried not to stare as well, but I felt as if I couldn't help it. The guy was just staring into the window directly at me. He didn't grin, he didn't look away. He was just fixated on me. The look he was giving me wasn't exactly a friendly one either. I would describe it as completely deadpan. It was chilling. I didn't like this. I didn't want to turn around and face him directly. I didn't like to be too confrontational for the sake of my wife and newborn child. I pulled out my phone at that point and tried to ignore the weirdo stare. I managed to pull my house keys out with it accidentally, and they fell down to the floor. I stooped to pick up the keys, and a couple of things happened in a split second. I looked into the window to keep an eye on this guy as I bent down to grab the keys. All of a sudden, he shot up to his feet and walked up right behind me. He was holding something in his hand, raising it above his head as if to attack. I screamed. I was completely defenseless. I dived forward, keeping low, toward the door to the next carriage. I had a plan in mind to get as close to the driver as possible. I put my hand on the door that connected the two carriages and took the opportunity to look behind me and see what was happening. It was instinctive. I was imagining seeing the guy running up behind me to attack again, but all of a sudden he wasn't there anymore. I didn't know if he'd dropped down low or hid behind something or was trying to attack in a different manner, if he was ever even there at all. But all of a sudden I didn't know where he was. That terrified me. I opened the door and ran straight to the front of the train and waited a few more terrifying moments. Only a few moments after, the train came to a stop at my station. The train pulled in, and I shot right off of it. A young couple and an office worker stared at me as they boarded. I was in a real state. I wanted to keep running, but as I turned to go, I thought about the people who would be getting on to the train. Was that man I saw in the reflection trying to attack me still on board somewhere? I attempted to tell them about him, but they ignored me. The train started moving down the tracks, and I walked, then ran to keep pace with it. I kept trying to catch the attention of the people who just boarded. I made some gestures with my arms while shouting at them and told them not to go onto the next carriage as best as I could. I tried to tell the station staff as well, but they just threatened to call the police on me if I didn't stop making a scene. I just had a close call, and I couldn't calm down. I hope somebody listened to me at least. I hope that whatever I saw was nothing more than a conjuration of a tired mind, but something in me tells me that it was not. I think that guy really was there. I never commuted to work again like that. I'll never ride through that tunnel again. There are some expenses and inconveniences that are sometimes worth suffering, I guess. It all started when I was in my early 20s. One of my friends moved into a new place, and I went to visit her with a housewarming gift. My friend told me that it wasn't a new place exactly. I didn't expect her first home to be brand spanking new either. When I got there, though, I was really taken aback by just how old it actually was. We spoke about the house when I met her up front. She said something like, "It's a good-sized place for my family, and my kids are still young. By the time they get bigger, though, we want to have enough saved up to move to a different place." Seemed like a reasonable enough decision to me. I was just happy to see her again. I hadn't seen her in maybe half a year, and she didn't really live locally anymore. I noticed there was something a bit different about her from the last time I'd seen her, though. She looked a lot thinner than last time. Almost emaciated. It was pretty shocking. She had bags under her eyes, though I guess that comes with having young children. I didn't really think that much of it. She gave me a little tour of the home, and I looked out one of the upstairs windows. I saw that she lived right next to a cemetery. My friend caught me staring into the graveyard and said to me with a snigger, "I guess you know why we got this place for such a great price, huh? Not exactly prime real estate." There was a note of hesitation in her voice, but she tried covering up with that joke and by laughing at her own circumstances. It's not like I was here to judge her and her place, though. I was just happy to see her again. The house seemed nice enough, in my opinion. As I was looking outside, I noticed something else, though. It sounded like they had some real noisy neighbors. It looked like a quiet residential area, so I really wasn't expecting that kind of noise. I could hear the voices very clearly. I guess it was because it was summer and all the neighbors must have had their windows open or something. I pointed it out to my friend, but she said she didn't hear anything. I guess that she must have gotten used to all the noise. But to me, it sounded like a festival was going on out there almost. I tried to pinpoint the source of that noise by craning my head out of the window, but I couldn't see anyone around. It was just kind of weird. There were all these voices I heard that sounded like a mixture of ages and genders. I could hear them clearly, but I couldn't make out a single word they were saying. Some of them seemed to be crying, some of them seemed to be talking in angry tones, and other ones seemed to be just talking normally. It didn't exactly sound like a garden party or friends getting together. It was just sort of weird. I couldn't stand being in the presence of all of that, so I told my friend I wasn't feeling well. I made up something about heat stroke since it was so hot out, and went home. I couldn't even make out my friend's reply. I was just so overwhelmed by how weird it was. Even after I left, I felt as if I could still hear those voices inside my head. I couldn't pull myself together. For the longest time, I thought there was something wrong with me. I felt for sure that my friend must have been affected by something in that same sense that I was. I had only been there for a short time, and she'd been living there for God knows how long. I wondered if I should have just come clean with her and told her the truth behind why I'd left so suddenly. But, I mean, could I really do that and sound like a sane person? Apparently, I was the only one who'd heard it, and not her. I wrestled with what to do about it. About a month later, I gave her a call to see how she was doing. I didn't plan on telling her how I'd been feeling in the moment or how strange the voices were, but when I spoke to her, it just came rushing out of me. To my surprise, she said, "Yeah, I know." She seemed to be aware of some weird goings-on at her house. The newborn children had been inconsolable most nights and would cry and look at things that weren't there. Things would also move around, and they'd hear strange noises. She spoke to her husband and pleaded with him to move, and he even agreed. That was a bit of a shock to me, because he was just about the most stubborn man I'd ever seen in my life. I know that something must have been affecting him as well. They ended up moving. I visited with a brand new moving-in gift. When the door opened this time, my friend looked so much better than the last time I saw her. She was no longer exhausted or tired and didn't look nearly as depressed. In fact, she almost seemed to glow. That was how I learned not to just be swayed by cheap prices. I made sure when it was time for me to move house that I thoroughly inspected the area around. I work in an office in Tokyo. The other night, I was out with a bunch of fellow female colleagues. We all went out for some drinks together, and it was a really great night, actually. I caught the last train home to Itabashi, where my apartment is. I was sat down at my desk using my handheld mirror to take off my makeup, getting ready to go to sleep. That was when I noticed something very strange. There was a doll on my bookcase behind me, but I was absolutely sure had not been there before. It was looking down at me from on high. It had a white face like most Japanese dolls do, and it had a red kimono. It's funny, isn't it, when you notice something so out of place that you can't stop looking at it? It stood out to me because I knew I did not own a doll like that. In fact, I didn't own any dolls at all. As soon as I realized that it didn't belong to me, I put down my handheld mirror. I got up and turned around to look at the bookcase, and all of a sudden the doll wasn't there anymore. That really scared the living hell out of me at first, but ever since I was a kid, I was heavily encouraged to look for the most logical answers and to approach things scientifically instead of irrationally. I convinced myself that after having some drinks and it being so late at night, that I must have just been tired and seeing things. I went off to sleep, and it didn't really take that long. I was pretty exhausted. A week passed by without anything strange happening, and I pretty much forgot all about that incident that night. That all changed one night, though, when I had a real long soak in the bath. Afterwards, I put my underwear on and sat at the edge of the bed, watching TV and drinking a low-calorie beer. That was when something caught my eye once more. For some reason, I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me that something was out of place. The feeling I had was very clear. It was an unsettling feeling. Before I knew it, my eyes pulled back toward the direction of that bad feeling. I looked toward the window, which I'd carelessly forgotten to shut before taking a bath. I didn't usually pay attention to it, to be honest. It's easy to forget when you live in a block of apartments. I looked into the portion of the glass that was visible. Due to the darkness of the room and the light of the TV, it provided a great reflection of the area around me. I saw something that I'll never forget. It was the same doll I'd seen about a week ago, now propped up on my pillow and facing me. It was staring at my back as I watched the TV. I got up and ran out of the room. When I finally got the courage to go back in, it was no longer there. It was gone. I knew that my eyes weren't just seeing things, though. It really had been there. I couldn't deal with that. I don't care if you call me a coward or anything like that, or say that it wasn't real. I know what I saw. At that point, I just ran out of there, only my phone in my hand. I didn't even look back to see what was going on. I stayed with a friend until I got out of my lease. I told my landlord I had to leave urgently, and he didn't really seem that surprised. I don't think he was interested in the slightest, really. I don't know what happened with that whole experience, but it was very scary to me. This is something my friend claims to be a true story. He was working part-time at a theme park, a pretty popular place that people from different parts of Japan would very likely know. I've been asked not to mention the specific area, though. A few months after he began to work there, he was asked to work the haunted house attraction. Well, I guess he wasn't really asked to, more like told that he had to do it. The haunted house was located right at the edge of the theme park, sort of the innermost attraction, the one furthest away from the entrance. The haunted house was most popular with teens and younger adults. My friend's job was to manipulate props and puppets and scare the guests that came by. The haunted house was quite dark, so guests would already be on edge. There was also a cassette playing creepy noises. The props that didn't move looked like they could, so it made my friend's job pretty easy to scare people. I'll put this very simply. My friend just loves scaring people. He's always been pretty dang good at it too, considering all the times he scared me as a kid. Seemed like he'd found the perfect position for his unusual talents by chance. I could tell he really enjoyed working there too. The theme park generally closed at about 6 p.m. or so, and the guests were expected to leave. There were 8 total people who worked in there with him. Some actors, other prop movers. I guess they were taking tickets and admission as well. You know, they all did the same sort of thing he did mostly. They took turns doing it as well. One night, just after 6, when everyone was getting changed out of their costumes and ready to head home, my friend heard something quite strange. They were removing all their makeup and all that, when my friend said he heard what sounded like a woman screaming. 2 short bursts of terrified screams. "Hey, did you guys hear that just now?" he asked his coworkers. He thought there might still be a guest inside or something. However, none of his coworkers seemed to have heard it. My friend thought it could have just been his imagination. He had, after all, spent the entire day listening to the sounds of people yelling and screaming. He put it into the back of his mind and clocked out. He was on shift again the following day. It was another great day of scaring people for him. However, this time, something was a little bit off. He kept feeling as though he was being watched. Obviously, in his line of work, if someone sees behind the curtain, so to speak, it gives away the authenticity of the attraction. Because of this, he was pretty cautious of his surroundings whenever he felt the eyes of someone upon him. He would look around to see if anyone was near him. This time, though, there didn't seem to be anyone around. He decided to put it to the back of his mind, like the scream he'd heard the night before. Another slightly weird day. Eventually, he headed back to the changing room, getting ready to head home. As he was heading into the staff room, though, he heard that scream again. This time, he knew he had personally done a sweep of the entire attraction to make sure there were no more guests in the building. He decided to go personally investigate this time. He walked down the dark corridors and turned a corner, only to see a woman covered in blood from head to toe. She did that scream that he'd been hearing and ran off into the darkness. He was obviously surprised by this. It wasn't a normal occurrence for staff to scare one another like this. He didn't know what to do, but at first he thought it was just another employee playing a prank on him. He shouted in the direction the woman had run in. "Hey, who is that?" He didn't get an answer. He asked his coworkers, and they didn't have a clue what he was talking about. They went with him back to the scene of where he'd seen the girl. They didn't find anybody there, though they did find a bloody prop mannequin. He felt so embarrassed by that he said he must have been seeing things, and also hearing things. Deep down, though, he thought there must have been something more than just him getting scared by a stationary bloody prop. A couple of days later, he was working behind the scenes, trying to frighten some guests once more. That was when he felt someone tap him on the shoulder. He spun around, only to find out that someone really was there. He came face to face with a woman seemingly covered in blood, just like the one he'd seen in the ghost house the night before. He didn't panic, though. He stared at her, trying to make out what she might look like without all the fake blood covering her. She smiled and ran off behind the curtain back into the ghost house. He was sure at this point that he was being pranked by another employee. Later, when everyone was getting ready to leave, he singled out the female ones and asked them if they'd done this. Did they cover themselves in fake blood and try to scare him earlier? They all replied no, of course. They had no idea what he was even talking about. My friend was so creeped out by what was going on that he started to hate coming to work in that area. He pleaded to change roles within the theme park and no longer wanted to work that ghost house. He said the eerie feeling of being watched in that attraction didn't end there either. He started to feel like they were following him around other areas of the park. He really thought something was going on, and it was connected to what happened in that ghost house. He told me that he didn't think it was a spirit, though. They really touched him. He thinks it was a very real person who had been sneaking into the attraction to mess with him for whatever reason. Perhaps a very odd staff member who wanted to single him out particularly. I told him that maybe he shouldn't rule out the paranormal, but he's not very interested in that theory, doesn't put much stock in it. I personally like to believe in the supernatural, so that's why I like that idea. But either way, at the end of the month, he was allowed to move far away from that attraction, so I guess we'll see if he keeps being haunted by this ghost. As a single woman who'll turn 30 this year, I've been thinking a lot about my life. I want to share this terrifying experience. It happened when I was much younger. When I was young, I lived in a quiet area. Ever since I can remember, my dad hasn't been in the picture. It's always just been me and my mom. She wasn't there as often as she could have been, I guess. That was because she had to work 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. This happened in spring, when I was in the early years of elementary school. I remember I was on my way home from school, and my mother was worried about me getting home by myself. At first, she didn't even want to let me do it, but I managed to convince her since we didn't live all that far away from school. I was coming home from school as usual, headed into our building. We lived in a block of apartments, mind you. I took off my shoes and went inside. I put my school bag down at the table and started to do some of my homework on top of it. My mom had left out some dinner she had prepared for me. In the morning, Mom would head off to work to a nearby toy factory, and on her lunch break, she would come home and make something for me for dinner. When she finished up work at the factory, she would then head to her second job working in a restaurant downtown. I was doing my homework, and it was really tough this time. I wished my mom was there to ask for some help. It must have been about an hour after I came home from school when I suddenly heard something. I heard a man's voice calling out, "Hello? Is someone in here?" I looked up to see a dark silhouette of a man standing in our hallway. I always forgot to lock the door at that age. I say silhouette because the way the sun was setting, it was behind the man and I couldn't see him very clearly. I remember the first notable thing about the man was the fact he was wearing a white long coat, the kind you'd see doctors wearing. The man started speaking before I even had a chance to think. "Young miss, I've got some terrible news, just terrible. Your mother, she collapsed in the factory. She's been taken to the hospital." "Oh my God, not my mom," I thought as I raced over to the doctor. I followed him out of the apartment. There was a big rusted black bicycle downstairs just in the apartment's lobby. He lifted me up and put me on the child's seat at the back, then climbed onto his own and started pedaling. We rode off under twilight skies. I was looking off to the side, watching the city pass us by. I asked the man if my mom was going to be okay, but he wouldn't reply. I asked again, but no matter how many times I asked him for more information, he refused to say a single word. After a little while, I noticed something that put me on edge. Even though I was young, I knew something was wrong. I realized that we weren't going the right way. We were heading towards the woods and mountains, and the hospital was in the opposite direction. "Hey, mister, I don't think we're going the right way." He didn't say a single word to me. I started to panic. I shouted with him. I tried pleading with him. I pretended not to care, but nothing I did made the man respond at all. A basic and frightening question rose to the forefront of my mind. If we weren't going to the hospital, then where were we going? I was becoming more and more frightened with each passing second. All the town roads and sidewalks were behind us now. We were on trails and dirt roads. There were dense rows of trees on either side of us. It was getting so dark without the streetlights. Why were we going down this dark forest road? The man pedaled silently. We were not going to stop. I knew at this point the man was not a friendly man. He was going to hurt me. He wasn't behaving like any adults I knew. He wasn't like my mom or my teachers. This guy was strange. In those moments of quiet contemplation, for the first time in my life ever, I thought about being killed. I was so scared that I just started to scream as loudly as I could. I wish I'd had the presence of mind to do that in town, where there were more people and more lights. My scream made the man finally talk. He spun his head around to me for a second and said, "We'll be there soon. No need to scream. I'm a gentleman, you know. I'm very kind." He said that weird statement with a look of frustration on his face. I knew I needed to do something right now, but it felt like I didn't have many available options. I jumped out of his bicycle seat. I hit the ground really hard and messed up my knees badly. I staggered to my feet and ran as fast as I could into the woods. I must have tripped and stumbled a half-dozen times, but there was no way I could stop moving. From behind me, I heard the strange man start yelling. "Miss, where are you? Come to me, it'll all be fine. Your mom is about to die if you run away from me. Your mother will die. Do you understand? So hurry up and get out here right now." He sounded extremely frustrated and tried to put on a fake friendly voice as if he was calling a cat or something. "Miss, come on out. It'll be fine. I'll take you to see your mom. Come on." I felt disgusted by the man and his voice. I also didn't want my mom to die, though. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I go back to the man or not? He was wearing a doctor's coat after all. I was wrestling with all these conflicting thoughts in my mind. I was really torn. I slapped myself and reminded myself there were no hospitals in these woods. That made that man a liar. And if he was comfortable enough to lie about the hospital, then surely he was lying about my mom too. I hid behind a really large tree and waited until I couldn't hear the man calling anymore. Apparently, I was found the next morning in a cemetery at the foot of the mountain, about 3 kilometers away from my home. I don't even remember how I managed to get there. All I remember is stumbling around in the dark. An old man who came to clean up the gravestones found me hugging my knees to my chest beneath a big tree. I can't remember much of what happened after. I found out that my mom didn't collapse though, and that she was perfectly fine. She came home from work and found I wasn't there, and that the door wasn't locked either. She called the police right away and reported me missing. I have no idea what happened to the suspicious man, but my mom and I have our theories. We think he must have known about my mom's workplace in order to feed me that lie about her collapsing in the factory. My mom tried to shelter me from replaying that night's events, and we don't talk about it much. There are a few questions that are left unanswered. What was his purpose taking me out into the middle of nowhere? I'm not sure I want to know. When I try to remember that guy's face, I can't seem to recall any significant details, so you can imagine how much help I was to the police at the time. It's a traumatizing event, and one I'm lucky to have survived. I really thought I was going to die. I was on a business trip in a really remote area. One of the ways I like to keep myself fit is by doing some jogging. I sit down at a desk most of the day and then get behind the wheel of my car, so I like to get out and about every once in a while. I finished up work on this day and got ready for my jog as usual. I remember it was notably cold out that day, so I put a neck warmer on. Usually, when I'm staying away on business trips, I stay in the city, so when I run throughout the streets. Because I was in a more remote area, though, I felt it would be a great chance to run off-road, so to speak. You know, go through the woods and down various trails and stuff. I planned on running for about half an hour or so. I was really enjoying the run and the scenery, though, so I just kept on going. I was making good time, too. I headed deeper and deeper into the woods, and even crossed a river at one point. I was really curious as to where I would end up. Eventually, I came out at a kind of forestry school in the middle of the woods. I looked down at my watch and noticed it was about 9 p.m. or so. Pretty late, actually. When I looked up, I saw a dark shadow and stopped in my tracks. There was a small, dim sensor light close to the forestry school, and it came on as soon as I stopped. The shadowy figure shambled toward the school and into the light. My heart skipped a beat. I knew what that shadow was instantly. A bear, about 20 meters ahead of me, and a big one, too. I felt like all the blood in my body ran ice cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't act. All I could do was stand there like a statue, watching this bear. Suddenly, something brought me back to my senses. A very unique noise. It was the sound of the bear grunting. It was close enough now that I could hear its breathing. The bear was about as big as a grown adult man. A bit bigger, actually, and a lot thicker as well. Ah, crap, I thought. I turned and ran as fast as I could. The moment I started running, though, I realized I had just broken the first rule for encounters with bears. You should never turn your back and run from a bear. I looked back over my shoulder and saw that gigantic black shadow hounding toward me. It was too late. I was being pursued. Even though a bear is much larger than a human being, the speed they can rush at you with is unbelievable. I'd never been so terrified. In that moment, a memory came back to me suddenly. It was something my grandpa said. He was a man who loved the wild, and I really looked up to him. I realized that I needed to stop running in a straight line if I was to stand any chance, so I decided to dash into the brush off the side of the trail. I felt an instant agony in my legs. I knew I couldn't break my pace, though. I got to a point where eventually I realized I could not run anymore. I fell into a barrel roll down a short hill. I kept moving as soon as I came to a stop, because I could still hear that horrible grunting sound pursuing me. To be honest, I thought to myself as long as my legs could carry me, I would keep moving. I didn't care if I got spiked through by plants or ended up with bruises. I just had to keep going. I didn't care how long it would take my legs to recover after either. As long as I escaped these woods with my life, everything would be fine. After that drop, I knew it wouldn't be long before I reached the river. I figured that if I crossed it, the bear might give up on me. I don't know why I thought that since bears can swim, but I thought it must be my only shot. I guess some part of me remembered that over the river was the town, and in town there were lights and other people. I landed in the river. It was freezing and slippery. There was tons of algae on the riverbed. It was difficult to get a foothold. Even more difficult when something is chasing you. I thought I would be at least a couple of seconds ahead of the bear, but before I knew it, I heard a splash of water and a grunting noise. It was right next to me. It was at that moment I knew it was all over. I remember a thought distinctly, clear as a bell. I thought to myself that I was going to die. I felt my legs give way beneath me. I slipped on the algae, and the current began to sweep me down the river at a rapid pace. I clattered with rocks as they hit against my body. I knew I wouldn't be able to make a quick enough getaway if the bear came after me again. Some part of my mind wondered if maybe the river would carry me downstream fast enough that the bear wouldn't be able to catch me. I didn't have much hope, though. It was all going to be over. I could just imagine its jaws locking onto one of my limbs. Just when it looked to be the darkest, a mini-truck arrived out of nowhere and stopped on the bridge just up ahead. I heard a man's voice call out. I think it was an old man, but I couldn't see him that well. It was really dark out now. In the loudest voice I could muster, I shouted, "I'm being chased! Help me!" I heard something like a match striking, something being lit on fire, and a massive bang. It sounded like explosives or fireworks going off. After a while, I heard footfalls approaching me. The old man waded into the river and picked me up, grabbing me by my shoulder. He wrenched me out of the river and dragged me back to his truck. I was taken to the hospital. I spent some time there. As it turned out, I had broken multiple bones, including some ribs. My ankles were bruised all over, and I had some hypothermia as well. I profusely thanked the guy who helped me. He happened to be a local farmer who was on his way back from the pachinko parlor. If you're not familiar with, it's basically a kind of legal gambling place in Japan. They're really popular, actually. The explosive sound I'd heard was him throwing firecrackers at the bear. He said he carried them around this time of year because of the threat of them in that area. I respected his quick thinking and the fact that he was so prepared. What I respected even more was the stern telling off he gave me for not being prepared at all myself, not knowing what I was doing, having no defenses like bear repellent. He talked to me the way my dad would. You know, exactly what I needed to hear. I got yelled at so badly that all I wanted to do was disappear into my hospital bed. Needless to say, I will not be making the same mistake again. I'm lucky to just be alive. Please, for my sake, take precautions and be prepared whenever you head out into the wilderness, especially in autumn. Remember, it's a wild place out there. Warning: this story may be distressing for some viewers. This happened when I was in high school one day. My dad told me that he thought our neighbor was missing. All the mail outside his house was piling up, and that wasn't really like him. He was a very neat and tidy man. My dad knocked on his door a bunch of times, but he never answered. He had disappeared without a trace. He didn't leave any kind of note at home or anything. And on the last time we'd seen him, he wasn't acting strangely at all. Nothing seemed to be out of the blue with him. 3 days later, a missing persons report was filed. His extended family asked locals to help join in the search for our missing neighbor. I joined in with my grandpa. We both weren't working at the time, so we were free to help. We met at the assigned meeting place and listened to the instructions of the group leader. Ahead of starting the search, I was very nervous. I was aware that I was venturing into a very adult world. My grandpa said they needed me to join the search, though, because I was young and might be able to spot things that the others weren't. I knew this to be true, as most of the people in the search group were as old as my grandpa, if not older. We were split into various teams. My grandpa and I joined the deep woods and mountains search. I was not accustomed to hiking at that age. I mean, I don't even like hiking nowadays, really. Come to think of it, this experience is to blame for that. I just followed along and tried to keep up with my grandpa and the rest of the group. Since I was a young high school student, I could rely on my sheer strength and energy levels. After a while, though, we split our group into even smaller subsections. My grandpa knew the mountains we lived close to really well, and often went out to forage for wild vegetables to harvest. My grandpa said that he and I would head into the deepest part of the woods together. I followed my grandpa. We climbed up and down and all over the place, but we couldn't find anything. I looked at my watch and saw it was coming up to noon. According to the instructions of the group leader, we were all to meet while having lunch to exchange information, then set off again. At some point, I couldn't see my grandpa anymore. He must have gone off a bit ahead of me. I turned around and called out in the general direction I thought he'd gone off in. Before I could even finish the word grandpa, though, my call turned into an involuntary scream. I didn't ever dream I would be the one to find my missing neighbor. He was right there, clear as day, right in front of me. He was hanging. There was a cloud of flies swarming around his bloated body. There was a light breeze that day, so he was swaying from side to side. I could hear the creaking of the rope against the tree's limb. Hearing my distressed scream, my grandpa came running over. He was coming from the opposite side. The body was between us. I saw the look of sheer horror upon his face. He saw the exact same sight I had. He let out a shocked gasp. He froze. I called out to him, but he was unresponsive, as if he was in a trance. His knees were shaking. I always thought that was a cliché, but I guess it's a true reaction. I ran over to him. I had to go the long way around the body, as I didn't want to get anywhere near that scene. When I got close to him, I shook his shoulders. I wanted him to come back to his senses. This was all so stressful for me. He slipped to one knee. I saw sweat gathering on his brow. His face was turning pale. He couldn't handle what he'd just seen, and I understood that I needed to get him out of there right now. I lifted him up onto my back like a piggyback ride and headed away from the area. Luckily, there was someone from one of the groups not too far away. I explained the situation and left my grandpa in their care. All I wanted to do was get out of there and go home. The police came next, as I was the person who discovered him. I was tasked with the duty of leading them to the area. I knew my grandpa wouldn't be able to do it, and as much as I didn't want to go back, I knew I had to. It's not something I could have just gotten out of. You really can't turn down the police, especially in a situation like this. I climbed the mountain with the officers and hated every second of this. I showed them the tree, and they made me watch as they cut down his body. It made a hollow, squishing sound as it hit the ground, and they took me back to the police station to be interviewed. I had to go through things again and again to their satisfaction. When I was finally released, my family wanted to know all about it too, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep going over the sight I'd seen. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I had some pain in my legs, but that wasn't the cause of my lack of sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could just see his body swaying in the breeze and hear that ominous noise. I had insomnia for a long time. It didn't end there, though. I wanted to just put it all behind me, but I couldn't quite yet. The owner of the mountain area came to our door with a request. He wanted me to cut down the tree our neighbor had died on, as I was the person who discovered the body. I don't know if this is a thing elsewhere or what, but I guess it sort of helps the bereaved soul to pass on. He offered to pay me to do it as well. Since I was a high school student, I didn't have many chances to make money, so I went with him. I guess he didn't want the tree to still stand on his property. The reasons for wanting it cut down were superstitious. With each step further into the woods, I felt closer and closer to all those feelings I'd felt when I'd first stumbled across that site. Even though I was exhausted from cutting down a tree after, I couldn't get any sleep that night, and I didn't for many nights after. This happened about 12 years ago. It happened when I was a student. I got into Kyoto University, and I began living alone for the very first time. I absolutely loved the freedom of it. Despite being a student, I was actually pretty well off. I had a motorcycle and used to love going out on these long rides. I had a girlfriend at the time as well, and we often rode together with her on the back and me driving. One awesome day, the weather seemed really nice, enough so that I took my girlfriend out for a ride. We'd crossed Hashi Bridge and had gone into the city to visit some friends. This event happened while we were on our way back. As you can imagine, it was night at that point. I was a bit tired from driving, so I wanted to take a break to smoke. I pulled over by Lake Biwa. It was nice to stop by the lake and take in the beautiful view and what was left of the dying light of the afternoon and evening. What I'll say is that the area wasn't super nice, though. What I will say is that the area wasn't super nice. I had to wade through some thick grass just to find a large rock we could both sit down on. We stayed there for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we left. We got back to the bike and started heading back to Kyoto. Nothing of note happened for the rest of the night. The next day, my girlfriend called me up and said she wanted me to take her back into the city to do some shopping. It was already dusk when I got that call, so I was thinking to myself I could probably make it in time. If I gunned it, I could probably arrive a little early. I arrived at her house, picked her up, and we went back over the bridge and past Lake Biwa as we did the night before. By the time we had finished shopping, it was really dark out. We'd managed to grab quite a lot of stuff. After we both got on my bike, we hurried back. As we approached the lake area, though, we were confronted by some unexpected traffic in the area. It was pretty rare to ever have a backup here. I was on a bike, so I didn't really mind that much, though. I slipped in and out of the queuing cars. I saw some red lights flashing up ahead and noticed there was a police car. I was thinking about what might be holding up all this traffic. I noticed that the spot the cop car was pulled over was pretty much in the exact same spot we'd pulled over the night before to take that quick break. The police were questioning some of the passing drivers, so I slowed down to speak to them. I was really curious as to what was going on here. When I was in my youth, I was a lot more cocky and outspoken. so I outright asked the cop, "Hey, what are you guys doing here? What happened?" It turned out they'd pulled the body out of the leg. "Hey, do you know anything about it?" he said. I replied to him, stating that I didn't really know what he was talking about. We found out later that the person who had been killed that very same night. It gives me shivers to think we were so close to what was going on and never even noticed a thing. My girlfriend probably felt the same way. I wonder what the full story of that guy was. May not be the creepiest story of all time, but I promise you it is a true one, and if anything like that ever happens to you, you'll understand when I say it was very frightening to me. On late-night drives, there's something about the empty road and the night air that just really jives with me. I don't need to have a particular destination in mind. All I need is some gas in the tank. One night not that long ago, I was out on one of my night drives. I'd just come off the highway and decided to drive up to a high point I knew of in the mountains. I figured the view from up there would be really perfect for this night. I planned on having a smoke and playing some tunes, then heading home. I live out in the sticks, by the way. It's not uncommon for me to use these mountain roads. Often, I would drive through these winding and narrow passes, heading up the mountain for something or other. The type of roads there are sided by nothing but thick forests all around. I went over something at some point. I didn't know what it was, but shortly after I drove over it, my car started to make these strange noises. It was a hissing sound. I realized that what must have happened was I must have driven over a nail or something. Sounded like I had a flat tire. There happened to be a little rest area just up ahead, so I decided to pull in and take a look at the damage. I was really annoyed. I loved my car, and I threw most of my money into maintaining it. I had just upgraded the tires, actually, and now one had a puncture. The area was not that big. It was primarily used as a rest area for a couple of truck drivers for long overnight drives. There was a restroom and a vending machine there, but that was pretty much it. Since it was really late on a Sunday night, nobody else was there. I had the place all to myself. I parked my car and looked at my back tires. I could see the issue right away. There was a very clear puncture. I was so annoyed. I lit up a smoke and just stood there sighing and looking dejected. After the smoke, I decided I may as well make use of the facilities while I was there, so I headed into the bathroom. Once I was finished, I stepped out and looked all around. There was nothing but mountains everywhere. It was really quiet, and to be honest, the atmosphere was a little spooky, all there alone in the dark of night. All of a sudden, my cell phone started ringing. That made me jump out of my skin. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out to answer, but that's when I realized it was not my cell phone ringing. I was mistaken. It was someone else's phone, with the exact same ringtone as mine. It sounded as though it was coming from the other side of the wall. I was scared now. I didn't know if I was alone anymore. I ran to my car and loitered for a moment, expecting someone to emerge from behind the building or something, but no one did. Come to think of it, there were no cars in the lot at all. If there was someone there, they must have arrived on foot. I decided to go check out that area. I was half wondering if someone might be hurt or lost their phone or something. I figured I might as well try and see what was going on. I got closer to the ringing and looked around the corner of the brick wall as stealthily as I could. I couldn't believe what I saw. Lying on the ground was a countless amount of smashed cell phones. One of them was ringing over and over. I thought about the chain of events which had led me to that parking lot and ran back to my car as fast as I could. I didn't care about damaging my vehicle. I just pulled out of there and headed back down the mountain pass. I chose to drive off like that for a few reasons, and if they aren't obvious to you, I'll break them down. I believe that flat tire was deliberate. I drove over something that was likely placed in the road strategically, so I would have to pull into the rest area and check my car. I think that area is where something terrible happened. The phones that were smashed up and thrown there must have been by whoever was doing that trap. Clearly, they weren't thorough enough, though, because one of the phones failed to break completely, and that's why it was ringing. I don't know what's going on there, but it must be something sinister. I wonder if one of the friends or family members of that phone's owner were calling to see where they were. What makes me say this as well is that I remember clearly that a lot of the phones seem to have feminine decorations on them, little gems and things like that. I could tell that some of them clearly belonged to women. I'm glad I got out of there without finding out what was going on. I reported it to the local police, of course, and they said they would look into it, but I didn't hear back from them ever again. I really wonder what might have happened if I had gone to answer that phone. I don't like thinking about what might have happened to the owners of all those phones, but I've prayed once or twice over it in hopes that they only suffered a robbery. This happened when I was a child. I grew up in the countryside. The village I grew up in was very traditional. They lived a very old-fashioned way of life. I only found out how technologically deprived and behind my village was when I finally got out of the area. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate living there or anything. I just didn't really know any better. There are things I learned in my village that I think have been lost on others in modern society. It was a place of traditions that took pride in the old ways. Anyway, there was this large field near our house. It was the type of field that was used to cultivate crops. I often saw an old man from my window working that field. I guess that he was the owner of it. He was there pretty much all the time. A really hard worker. He had this shed on his property as well. It wasn't a small one either. It was pretty big. He'd go in and out of that thing from sunrise to sunset. I was a curious kid back then. I mean, I didn't exactly have much to hold my attention. We didn't have electronics or video games in our home. Every now and then, when I was looking out the window and I saw him open that big shed, I would try and get a peek at whatever was in there. I could see farming tools and what looked to be a bunch of cardboard. A refrigerator as well. I only ever saw him go back and forth with tools. I never saw him open the refrigerator. As you might guess, to a bored and curious mind, the enigma of that refrigerator was quite alluring. I always wondered what could be in there. At first, I just wondered absent-mindedly. But like the crops in his field, my curiosity began to grow. Sometimes I would play near the field and pretend like my ball had gotten lost in it to try and get a closer look at the shed. I could never really time it right, though. I didn't have all that much style for attacks like that as a child. Plus, it was not our property, it was his. Ownership of property was paramount in that area. I was taught from a young age that outsiders and trespassers were people to be suspicious of. I didn't want to be labeled as one of those. One day, I asked a woman in the neighborhood what she thought might be in the shed. She was nice to me usually, but when I asked her, she just frowned and said that I didn't need to know. I thought that was a little odd, but it wasn't all that rare for adults to talk to kids like that, at least not where I'm from. I asked a couple of others, and some didn't even know what I was talking about. Others just didn't care. There were a few that, like that old lady, just told me that I didn't need to know. I don't remember exactly when, but one day I realized I just couldn't stand this anymore. I needed to know what was in that shed. I was full of curiosity. People telling me not to do something only fueled my desire to do so. I was going in there to see for myself what was inside. I decided I would sneak in at night. Not too late, though. I didn't want to sneak out in the dead of night. My grandpa lived with us, and he lived downstairs. I was sure that any noise would wake him up. I couldn't risk that. I decided I would quickly go and take a peek after dinner while my family was preoccupied. Under the cover of darkness, I crept across the field and approached the shed. It wasn't exactly hard to get into. I got in without much effort. I don't think the guy locked it at all. When I got in the shed, I knew I had a limited amount of time to get in and out. I headed straight for the fridge. I slowly creaked the door open and looked inside. There were a ton of plastic bottles and small cardboard boxes, but there was one thing that really stood out, something that looked incredibly out of place. I just had to reach out and see what it was. It was a hand. I know that sounds weird, but it was a human hand. I'm pretty sure of that. The hand I saw in the refrigerator looked like it was lacquered, might have had a kind of varnish or ceramic quality to it. I really wanted to know what it felt like. I reached out to touch it in a kind of handshake gesture. I was just reaching in when I heard someone shout at me. I was grabbed by the collar of my shirt and dragged backwards out of the shed. I got a scolding by the old man who owned that field near our house. It was pretty rough, but not as rough as what I got from my parents. I won't even go into that. From that night forward, the shed was always locked whenever the old man wasn't in the field. There was a big chain lock visible from my bedroom window. My grandma spoke to me once about it. I think she took pity on me for being scolded. Plus, I spent a lot of time moping around the house. She said one thing that really stood out in my mind over the years. That house has lost a lot of their people. I didn't know what that meant at the time. Such a vague statement. I guess the hand I saw in the fridge could be some kind of preserved memory from the past. I guess that would make sense about why I was told off so much from trying to go near the area. That's pretty scary to me. The only thing more scary about the whole fiasco is the way everyone seemed to be aware of what was inside that refrigerator, and no one said or did anything about it. I knew that it was something dark. I left the countryside and went to university and got a job in the city. I haven't been back there in a very long time, but I bet you that fridge is still there, hiding its strange contents in that locked shed. This happened back in 2021. I, 27 and female, had just moved from Melbourne to rural Australia to live with my fiancé. At that time, he was still only my boyfriend. He was 29 and was on military posting at the army base. The town we moved to was pretty isolated, about 4 to 5 hours to reach any large city in each direction. It was still big enough, though, with a few different suburbs surrounding the main area. Neither of us really knew the area at all before moving, and this led us to get a house in a pretty sketchy part of town. I'll try to explain the setup of the house first, as this will be important later. The house we moved into was quite old. It had huge glass windows everywhere, including the entirety of the front of the house. Because of this, you could easily see into the kitchen, living room, and one of the unused bedrooms without coming down the driveway. There was an old metal fence to the left of the house, which was about 1.5 meters tall. It led directly into the backyard. To the right of the house was a small path, hidden by an overgrowth of bush and plants from the front. With a locked gate, the height of the house that led to the back semi-enclosed patio and back door. The path was right next to the kitchen window. You couldn't exactly see out when the light was on, but you could see in if you were outside. When coming in through the back door from the patio, you would walk through the laundry with an adjacent bathroom, into the kitchen with our bedroom off to the left, and a second one directly next to ours. My boyfriend was out doing military stuff for a week, so I had been home alone. It was summer during this time, and it was quite hot. The house had terrible AC, so I had been sleeping with the windows open, and even left the back door wide open on accident when falling asleep a few times. I've always felt safe in Australia, and have lived mostly alone ever since I was 18. I didn't really have an issue with it. It comes to Friday, my 5th day there alone, and I decided to walk into town and find something to do. The walk took about an hour each way, and when I finally got home, I was looking forward to doing nothing besides getting out of this damn heat. I spent most of the afternoon in the living room, playing PlayStation and watching TV. I had heard a few weird noises, though, down the side of the house on the path next to the kitchen, leading to the patio. The guy who lived next to us had a workshop of some kind, though, so I assumed it must have just been him tinkering around. I'm one of those people who lay in bed before they're ready to go to sleep. As I laid there, around 10 p.m. or so, I was doing my nightly scroll of Reddit. This really saved my ass, as I read a story that prompted me to get up out of bed and go close and lock the back door, which I'd almost forgotten to do. The back door had a normal lock, then a reinforced deadlock with a key screwed into the wall. 45 minutes or so later, still hearing the neighbor tinkering around occasionally, I decided I was ready to actually go to bed. I go and start turning off all the lights, including the back patio light and kitchen light. I lay down in bed and am finishing up my mindless scrolling when I hear the noises again. This time, though, it was much louder. Still, it could just be that the guy was working in his workshop even harder, or maybe some kind of animal rustling things around. I was about to put down my phone and write it off, when suddenly, I heard a loud bang at my back door. I instantly felt like everything was going in slow motion. I just knew someone was kicking the back door in. I thought to myself, this cannot be happening. Then came another bang, and another. It was all so loud, and it felt like the house itself was shaking. I could hear multiple points of glass shattering, and the banging continuing. This went on for what felt like an eternity, but was only a few minutes. In my panic, after the second or third bang, thinking I could scare them off by pretending a man was here, I yelled out in the deepest voice I could, then slammed my bedroom door closed. Obviously, that didn't really work. I locked it and called 000, then pushed my bed up against the door. The banging was still going on, even as I called the police. Just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. There was nowhere else to hide, so I was crouched down in the corner of the room near my bed. While on the phone with police, I could hear someone starting to kick in the bedroom door as well. I was screaming at this point. I don't even remember what I was saying to the operator, or what they were saying to me. I remember praying the police arrived before these people got inside my room. I could hear sirens. The banging on the bedroom door stopped immediately, and I saw torches shining into the bedroom window. Because I was so scared, I couldn't really comprehend what the operator was saying to me. I had no idea if those torchlights were whoever had just kicked in my back door and bedroom door, or if it was the police finally arriving. I don't remember how I realized this, but it turned out it was the police outside. The next thing I remember, I was in the kitchen surrounded by 10 officers, crying and trying to explain what had happened. I was so inconsolable that the police had to use my boyfriend's army photos on the fridge to get his details to call the duty officer to allow him to come home. Once I calmed down a bit and my boyfriend got back, I saw the back gate to the patio was completely broken. The bedroom door was cracked, and the back door had been thrown off its hinges, with the deadlock completely ripped out of the wall. The laundry window had been smashed in as well. There were 2 sets of clear footprints on the door from where they had kicked the door in. I checked my phone and called 000 at 12:04 a.m. and had been on the phone for less than 5 minutes. What I think happened is that they must have followed me back from my walk. They could easily see from the road that I was alone and had been watching me on the path next to the kitchen for the evening. The noises I thought were the neighbor tinkering must have been them, and once I turned the lights off, they finally made their move. I don't think they anticipated the back door would be so hard to break down though, which is why they smashed the laundry room window. They couldn't unlock the deadbolt without the key though, so I guess they broke it down somehow. Luckily, that extra time saved me from whatever they were trying to do. The guys weren't ever caught, and we ended up moving house within the next few weeks. My boyfriend and I even ended up breaking up, as he was regularly out on duty and I couldn't stand to be home at night anymore. I would panic, cry, and not sleep until the sun would come up, and it put too much strain on the relationship. It wasn't until later that I realized I was experiencing PTSD, and after I worked through it, we got back together. I now live back in my home city in an apartment building that has 24/7 security, a billion cameras, and I got 2 dogs as well. In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old, and our apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up unit. Very typical low-budget Chicago rental in a changing neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter in this story. Our building had a total of 12 units. Mine and the 3 below me had a shared front entrance, and the other 8 units were through a different one. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to a rear gate, which led out to an open alley. From the front stairwell, there were windows on each landing to the back porches, so you could see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through that window. We had pretty good relations with our neighbors, especially those that lived directly below us and shared our front door. And that's the thing that saved all 3 of us, my partner, my dog, and me. My partner was in a touring band at the time and would leave for weekends or weeks at a time. It was a scary thing for me because I was SA'd and stalked by an ex in my teens and 20s. I was always worried something would tip him off and he'd start coming after me again. A little less than a month before a 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy message on Facebook from that stalker from yet another new account. It was about a week after my car had been broken into. The glove box had been emptied and things were thrown around, but the only thing that had been taken was a bag of dog treats. I even had $20 in the compartment between the seats, and they left the money alone. I was on high alert at this point, and very scared about the time I'd be alone during this tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me and the situation, and felt it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to a bad feeling and a few isolated things that weren't even direct threats. Truthfully, car break-ins are very, very common in Chicago anyway. It happened to me about 15 times. The police usually do reports over the phone and don't even come to the scene. That's how common it is. What I found the most strange, though, was that the thief didn't take the money. There was a homeless man who had started camping on the boulevard nearby recently, so I didn't think it could have been him. My partner left for his tour, and I set up some cameras and bought door braces for my front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea around this time. I thought maybe because she was picking up on my stress level. That meant I was taking her down all 4 flights of stairs for her to go 6 or 7 times a night. I began to have the distinct prickly crawling sensation of being watched whenever I would take her out. I couldn't tell where that person was though, or even if it was my own fear and paranoia. Her issues lasted an unusually long time too, almost a week or so. I was going in and out of the main door a lot, feeling very scared. At that point, I noticed that some of my neighbors didn't always pull the door all the way closed, so the lock would engage. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of the stalker. He was supportive and said he'd mention it to everyone else when he saw them. I noticed the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home at about 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. At 8:30 earlier that morning, my first-floor neighbor's place was burglarized. He was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and psychedelics, and lived all alone. I guess he went out for breakfast and forgot to lock his door while he was gone. Someone had come in, eaten the leftovers in his fridge, took a coat and pair of boots, took his college diploma as well, and left pretty much everything else. They left all the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment, left the drugs as well. The only other thing they took were a set of keys. The keys were to the first-floor apartment and a master key for the front door and back gate. The neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second-floor one said to go tell me because I had a stalker. So that's what he did. He let me know what had happened. My partner had just gotten home from his tour when he knocked at the front door. I just about jumped out of my skin. I looked through the peephole and recognized him. The three of us stood on the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabber-jawed for a while, about 15 to 20 minutes I'd say. While we were in the middle of talking, we heard the front door open and close below us. We didn't really think that much about it. Then though, we saw a man climbing up my back porch steps to my back door through the window. There was no other apartment he would have been going to. He had to walk past all 11 more accessible ones on his way to mine. I could see he was not my stalker, and I did not recognize him either, but his image is still burned into my mind. He was wearing flashy black shoes, the ones stolen from downstairs, and had a big black coat, which was oversized and hanging off his shoulders. We locked eyes through the window, and he froze halfway up the stairs to my back porch. He slowly took out a cell phone and called someone as he turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs extremely stiffly, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, then bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below ours. My neighbor ran downstairs and dialed 911. My partner and I ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out of the sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floored it down the alley. We didn't get the plates. The cops said it wouldn't have mattered though. There wasn't any crime committed and nothing concrete to justify stopping them. They very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the one who actually made the call and has the police report. My partner and I were just considered witnesses. For a long time though, the thing that scared me the most was a tool my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood, cut to about 2 feet. The last end of it had been made into a handle of some sorts. It almost looked like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was supposed to be. Eventually though, we figured out it was a ram for the door. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been broken. It seemed like they used their master key in order to place their ram on my door, then had somebody wait at the back porch to catch me if I tried to run out that way. The other person went to the front entrance since they only had the one key. When we caught them before they could catch us unawares, it seemed they aborted the plan. I suspect they'd been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured I was alone. It was pure coincidence my partner arrived home just 30 minutes before all of this. I feel we all could have been horribly injured or worse had we been trapped inside and had they gotten the jump on us. Nothing else ever came of it. My landlord refused to change the locks, but he did agree to let us out of our lease at least. I moved out of Chicago and have added a younger dog I'm training to do some bite work. My house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights now. It's been about 10 years since this happened, but I still remember things pretty clearly. I should note that this is told from my perspective, and I wish I could get my mother's on it as well. Unfortunately, she doesn't remember the events as well as I do. For context, I live in a mid-sized city in the southern United States, where the main thing to do at the time was to go to the mall. Sure, we had a movie theater and a couple of bowling alleys, but besides that, there wasn't really much to do. My mom worked at a department store located in the mall, and having nothing better to do, I would regularly go and visit and sit in the break room while she worked. It gave me a reason to get out of the house, and if I wanted to, I was allowed to walk around the mall or get something to snack on in the food court. Honestly though, I was fairly shy back then, so I preferred to just stay in the break room and play video games on my 3DS. My mom's coworkers were very sweet to me and frequently popped in to say hello or check in on me during downtime. If I was lucky enough to go with my mom on weekends, I could usually convince my mom to pick up my friend. We were actually dating, but since we were both girls, I didn't want anyone to find out, and she'd come along with us. Going to the mall meant I was free from doing chores at home, and it was a cheap way to sneak in a secret date every now and then. My girlfriend, though, never really liked staying in the break room with me. She always wanted to walk around the mall instead. I should note that she really enjoyed taking walks, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to want to do so at the mall as well. I just didn't like walking as much as she did. I tried to weasel my way out of it whenever I could. I could usually convince her to just walk over to a nearby store and look around or grab something from the food court rather than going all around the area. I noticed pretty quickly, though, that she wasn't really trying to get me to walk around. She actually seemed to just not want to be in the break room. My girlfriend is much more perceptive to things than I was, and I assumed she just didn't like the ambiance for some reason. For a little while, I just let it go, but eventually I got frustrated and I asked directly what was really bothering her about this break room. I thought she was going to tell me it was too cramped or the lights randomly cutting off made her uneasy, things that bothered me about it too, but no. She told me that she could hear things in the ceiling, like someone had been walking around up there. I had learned from my mother that there was in fact a room up in the ceiling, but it wasn't for walking around in, it was for maintenance. Most of the stuff in there was wiring and insulation. Technically, someone could go up there. I told my girlfriend this and said it was likely an employee just trying to fix things. She said it was fine, but she didn't really like it and still preferred walking around or sitting in the food court. I understood her discomfort and wanted to help, so I agreed. We had a really good relationship in the sense of communication, and though I did get a bit frustrated, I didn't really mind too much if it made her more comfortable. Later that day, I mentioned what my girlfriend had told me and asked what they were fixing in the ceiling to my mom. My mom looked very distressed though and said they hadn't been fixing anything that day. She wanted me to see something though. She took me into the receiving room of the department store, which was a room off in the back filled with boxes and random junk. The layout of this room though was sort of an L shape. Only one part was used for receiving. The other part was a way up into the ceiling. I should clarify for this next part that to get into the ceiling, the store would have to call for the mall's maintenance team. They didn't have a ladder or anything on hand to climb in there, as it would have been a safety hazard to leave around. The only thing this particular area had was the hatch that led to the ceiling. That was it. Needless to say, I was horrified to see what appeared to be gash marks leading up the wall to the hatch. I still remember the way they looked. Brown gashes that had been dug into the concrete wall of the receiving room. I asked my mom if this was a prank, but she told me that wasn't even the first time it had happened. She had no way of knowing I would even ask about it. According to her, these weird gashes would show up several times over the course of many months. Each time, the store would call the mall's security and maintenance teams, who would clean the wall up and go into the ceiling to investigate. They never found anything with their searches though, and they eventually gave up looking altogether. The only explanation they could find was that it was likely a homeless individual who had somehow made their way into the ceiling and somehow avoided everyone during all the searches. I stopped staying at the mall with my mom after that, and anytime I wanted my girlfriend to come over, we found somewhere else to go during the day. I didn't really feel safe going to the break room after that. I know nothing had technically happened up until that point, but I didn't want to risk hanging around with some random person skulking about in the ceiling. First of all, I'm sorry if my English is not the best, but I'm from Italy and I learned all on my own. This is my first time writing something out. I want to share this strange episode from my childhood. I was around 9 or 10 years old and used to go to school all on my own. It was just a short walk. It wasn't that far, only about 10 minutes every day. I went the same way every time. It was the shortest way, but it was also the most isolated. I was walking alone as I always did when I noticed a police car coming up on my left. There was a middle-aged man inside, obviously a policeman. He slowed down and started talking to me. "Hey kid, are you going to school?" I said yes, and he kept driving next to me. He asked if I wanted to hop into his car so he could take me to school faster. I said no, and that my mom had always told me not to talk with strangers. "Oh, I'm not a stranger. I'm a policeman. You can trust me." I thanked him for the offer, but told him it wasn't really a problem. The school wasn't that far away now. He insisted though. He sped up a bit and got right in front of me, then opened the car door. "Come on, it'll be fun to take a ride in the police car. It's almost every child's dream." I said once again for the man to leave me alone. He kept the car door open, staring at me. I started to walk a little faster and went down a side street. As soon as I did so, I started to run, to the point where I could no longer even see the car behind me. I was shocked from the events. I was a very young person. You know, that policeman had a very weird smile when I think back on it. Very disturbing, very unnatural. Since that day, I never took that way again, and my mom started to walk with me, at least for a while in the mornings to school. I never figured out what the man wanted, or if he had good or bad intentions, taking advantage of the fact he was a policeman so kids would trust him more easily. I'm happy though that I didn't have to discover what was on his mind. Who knows what may have happened to me? This happened to my dad 10 years ago. Nothing too crazy. I was relatively young at the time, so it really creeped me out. We lived in a smallish city in a residential neighborhood, about 20 minutes from downtown. It was summer and my dad was up late writing, around 3 a.m. or so. As he looked out the window, he could see a man and a woman, anywhere from 25 to 30 years old, walking down the street. They walked right up our driveway and right to our front door, possibly because they saw a light on inside. They knocked loudly on the door. My dad was already suspicious of what these two wanted. He decided not to open the door. Our door had a large glass window on it, and if you spoke loudly enough, you could hear someone on the other side. My dad asked them what they wanted, and they asked to come inside. My dad, of course, refused, but the couple repeatedly asked if he could call them a cab then. My dad said okay to this. As soon as he did, the couple again asked if they could come inside. My dad said no, and told them to wait at the end of the driveway. My dad then turned away from the door and shut all the lights off in the house. He never did get the chance to call a cab though. As he went to the window to watch the couple, they walked back to the end of the driveway, appeared to have a long conversation, and then walked back down the road, out of sight and into the darkness. I can understand someone showing up to ask for a cab if you live near a bar or a restaurant or something, But like I said, we were 20 minutes away from any of that stuff. Our neighborhood was mostly young families, and it was a very safe area. We did have a few incidents of people going to our cars at night if we left them unlocked, but that was it really. I was asleep the whole time this was happening. When my dad recounted the tale in the morning, it definitely spooked me. Afterwards, if I woke up in the middle of the night, I would have a difficult time getting back to sleep. My neighbors ended up having a break-in a few months after this incident, so we decided to get an alarm system for the house. It definitely helps me sleep at night. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.